clock here says my clock is showing 11:37. So I'd like to welcome everybody. I certainly want to thank the panelists for joining us, and they're virtually throughout the 5 different states here today, and all the participants who are still coming in. Welcome everybody. This is the 4th and final webinar that we have sponsored this year. And just a very quick recap, we started this series back in January with a look at issues of race and the death penalty. In May, we did one on of the monetary costs surrounding the death penalty. We did one in September on politics and the death penalty. We had 6 elected political figures, 5 of whom were district attorneys in various states, and 1 member of the Wyoming legislature, who they're all opposed to the death penalty. And today is the 4th and final one this year, which is entitled Voices of the Death Penalty. And we're honored to have 5 people with us who have encountered this phenomenon called the death penalty in the United States from different personal experiences. And that is what they will be talking about. What happened to each of them, when it happened, and the impact on them and their family. And then we'll take questions that at the end that you can clearly put into the chat. I'm going to ask each person to tell his or her story in about 10 or 15 minutes worth of time, and then we'll take your Q&A. Let me just initially thank Amanda Armstrong from Amnesty International, who set all this up technologically here in Dallas, helping with the technology and hosting. My good friends Nick Hernandez and Hadi Jawad. You can see them on the screen, and this couldn't happen without them. So gentlemen, you know how much I appreciate you and for all you do, and clearly for your technical expertise. And a brief word about each of the people that are on your screen. And this will be the order in which they speak. So let me just say something very briefly about them, because they'll tell you their story. Sabrina Butler Smith, whose story took place in Mississippi, but she is currently in Memphis. SueZann Bosler, down in the warmer temperatures of Miami. Gary Drinkard in Alabama. The Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan in Ohio, and last but certainly not least, Melanie Herbert, who's here in Dallas. So we're kind of moving east to west, although we are starting with Sabrina. And Sabrina, let me introduce to you and ask you to start us off. And again, thank you so much for sharing your time and experience with us and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick, for having me, and I thank you guys for coming out to hear our stories today. My name is Sabrina Butler Smith, and I lived in a little small town called Columbus, Mississippi. I've been on my own since I was like 14 years old, and I had 2 children by the age of, before I turned, by the age of 17. My oldest son was almost 2, and at the time he was at his grandparents' house. So I had my younger son, who was 9 months old, and his name was Walter. I lived in an apartment complex. I'd been over there probably not very long. I didn't know anyone over there. I didn't have a car or phone or anything like that. So I was basically just trying to survive, living on my own without my parents. One night, I decided to go jogging. I put my son to sleep, and the way I did it, I put him to sleep in the apartment complex where I stayed at. It was in a dead end, and you could see the end of the street. You could see the apartments, And so I went for a jog and I left him in the house. Um, and that was wrong. But at the time, I thought maybe I would be back. I wasn't even gone 10 minutes. So when I jogged back, I kind of knew when my son would wake up, and I went in the kitchen. I went in the kitchen, got him a bottle, and went straight to his room. When I went to his room, I noticed that he wasn't breathing. So I grabbed him and I ran outside, and this was like 12 o'clock at night. It was late. And I was beating on doors trying to get somebody to come to the door to help me. People didn't know me. And so I'm pretty sure that's why they were, it was late. Nobody's, gonna open their doors. They didn't know what was going on. So I finally got this first lady to open the door, but she told me that her kids was in bed and she didn't have time. So she closed the door in my face. So I had to run downstairs. And when I ran downstairs, I was just beating on anybody's door, to try to get help for him. Cause I didn't know what to do. And at the time I was only 17. So this lady came from the end apartment and she grabbed my son and she took him in her apartment, put him on the floor, and she started CPR. When she did that, I ran to try to see if I could get anybody to help me. So I got this couple who was willing to take me to the hospital. So I ran back in to get him, and the lady told me to hold his nose, blow in his mouth, and press in his stomach. Well, she told me the wrong way because I applied adult CPR to my son all the way to the hospital. I thought I was helping, trying to get him to breathe. And so when I got to the hospital, they took him from me, and uh, when they took him, they wouldn't let me go back with him. But the first thing came to my mind was that, man, you are in so much trouble because you left him at the house by himself, and the first thought to me at that time was to lie like a kid, because I was a kid and I just felt like, I couldn't be honest about that. So I lied. I didn't tell them the truth. I just started making up stuff. And so I went to the police station from there, and, I just still didn't tell the truth. And so they sent me home. They told me to go home. I went home and I was, just walking around trying to figure out, what had happened. Why did he stop breathing? I couldn't wait for the sun to come up so that I could, get to the hospital to see what they would say. So when I got to the hospital, the police were there and they said, we want to take you back down for more questioning. So they put me in a police car, and right off rip, the guy said, I sure hate you in so much trouble because if you wasn't in all this trouble, me and you could do some things. I really wasn't concerned about what he was saying because I was just lost, trying to figure out what was wrong. I wasn't at myself. I was just, a basket case. I was a mess because, I lost my son, and I felt like the people were lying to me. That's what I felt like. I felt like they were lying to me and they were just trying to take my son. And so when I got to the to the police station, before I could sit down in the chair, they started just in my face, screaming and yelling, telling me that I beat my son, I stomped him, I did all this kind of stuff. And I'm trying to tell them that ain't what happened. And this interrogation went on for over 4 hours. I didn't have no parents there. I didn't know, what my rights were because at the time, me being a child like that, I didn't know what that really meant. I thought that you have the right to remain silent meant be quiet until spoken to. Because I'm not a lawyer. I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't know, my rights or anything like that. And they clearly took advantage of that. That's exactly what they did because, here I am a kid and they're interrogating me, telling me I beat and stomped and killed my child. And I'm trying to tell them that is not what happened. No, this is what happened. So the lead detective, he decided to write out the statement. He wrote the statement out. After 4 hours, I was crying, I was upset, and he shoved it in my face and he said, now sign this. And so the only thing that I could do then was to sign at the very bottom of the page where thinking that somebody would see this and know that I didn't commit this crime, that something is wrong. And actually that did help me because that was brought up in the trial. So they charged me with capital murder in the course of child abuse. They charged me with a child abuse charge that wasn't even a law until 23 days after I was already incarcerated. How you do that, I don't know, but that's what they did. So I sat in the county jail for a whole year before I even saw my attorneys. I saw them 2 days before trial. Still didn't know what my son died from. Didn't know who my attorneys was until 2 days before trial. When I saw them, they didn't give me any type of, they didn't talk to me to tell me what to expect, what to do, nothing. They just told me to sit and look at the jury. They waited till I turned 18 before I went to trial. So when I got to the trial part of it, me being as young as I was, the only thing I understood was none of these people look like me and that I'm done for, that they were going to do whatever they said they was going to do. And that's exactly what happened. All two blacks on the jury and one was an alternate. Everybody else was white. And when I saw that, I knew my life was over. I knew it by looking at the jury. And I was right. One of the attorneys that I had, he was drunk during the whole trial. He was popping candy in his mouth, like, oh, we got this thing nipped in the bud. I kept begging to take the stand in my own defense. They wouldn't let me do that. They didn't call any witnesses in my case. The attorneys that I had, they used the district attorney's people, which I didn't understand that part. It was mostly just doctors, police officers, and people from the district attorney's office to testify. Next thing I know, I was found guilty. My sentencing was March the 13th of 1990, and my death date was July the 2nd of 1990. When I made it to death row, I was 19 years old. That is one of the horriblest places and experience to go through, to know that I lost my son, didn't know what he died from, and now I'm accused of killing him. When I got there, they treated me like crap. I was stripped of all my clothes. They put bug spray in my hair. They fingerprinted me, put me in this bullpen like a dog. I had to walk shackled around my ankles and wrists to maximum security unit, and I had a officer with me that said, "You see those inmates out there in the field?" He said, "We tell them what to do. We tell them when to go to sleep. We tell them when to get up." He said, "But you will die here." And before I got to max security, I was just gone. Because I'm trying to figure out, these people are really going to kill me. I didn't know what to do. And I'm, trying to say my innocence or tell my innocence, and nobody cared. When I got to death row, I was in a 6x9 cell, no bigger than your bathroom, 1 hour yard call, and no human contact. I met this girl that was on death row with me who was next door to me. And so we began to talk through the toilet on the floor. So that was the only comfort I had, because she had already been there and she was telling me what was to expect and what was going on. We were the only two in Mississippi at the time on death row. I was the youngest on death row. The hardest part, even harder for me, besides losing my son, was my death date. And that was July the 2nd. I paced the floors. I listened for every change, every sound, because I actually thought that was the day that I was going to die, because nobody told me that the state had to exhaust all state remedies before they could actually carry out a death sentence. So I was scared to death, scared out of my mind. When you're going through stuff like that, that is not something that you will ever, ever forget. To know that your life is in someone else's hand for all the wrong reasons. My sentence was overturned. It was overturned in August of 92. I ended up with 2 more sets of attorneys who found out that my son had heart problems, kidney problems, and chronic bowel syndrome. It was nothing that I had caused his death, nothing. I have an 18-year-old daughter today that has the same disease he had. So what do you tell a person and you do that to them? They tortured me for nothing. And that's the reason why I do this case and I tell my story, because I want people to know that the death penalty that is in place now is not it's not what they're using. They're actually killing innocent people. And that is not right. That's not right. You don't take somebody's life and just make it your own. No one person should have that power to decide who lives and who dies. That's not our place to do that to people. Meanwhile, you got exonerees walking around who are damaged from the stuff that this system has done, and you don't care. They don't care about what they've done. They don't care. That's my story. I will yield the floor to someone else.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Love you, sister.
I love
It's,
you too, Gary.
just a nightmare of a story and a tragedy. And mercifully, of course, you're with us and able to talk about that. And for the benefit of folks, and this will come up later, I just want to mention you could see a little bit on Sabrina's shirt that Sabrina, there it is. Sabrina does work with this organization. Gary does as well. Witness to Innocence, and we can talk about that a little later. But Sabrina, thank you so much. Thank you. SueZann Bosler down in Miami, a story of a parallel nature, different but similar. And I turn the floor to you. Thanks.
Yes, oh my goodness, it's always good to hear Sabrina talk and hearing that story over again. Thank you, Sabrina. God bless you. Yes, I'm really honored to be here with Voices of the Death Penalty, because of all of us do have a story. And mine happened to be a story that happened on December 22nd, 1986. But before I tell my story, I wanted to, this shirt that I'm wearing is called Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing. I'm a co-founder of it, but I am also wearing this in honor of Bill Pelkey, to continue his legacy to abolish the death penalty too. So I wanted to start off also by, I think everybody's heard this, or a lot of people have, is that Bill's one statement that everybody knows about Bill is the answer is love and compassion for all of humanity. So here it goes, is on December 22nd, 1986 was a day that changed my life. And when it changed my life, it was something that nobody ever expects. And my father was a minister, Reverend Bill Bossler, with the Church of the Brethren. And we happened to live at the parsonage, which is attached to the church in South Florida. And we were always having people come to our house for help, all kinds of help, and for them, and we would give them anything they need. So that day when my father and I were home, when I heard the doorbell ring, I was interested when I listened to see if it was a regular that came back regularly or if it was a new person with new needs. And as soon as my dad opened the door, it was weird because I wasn't expecting these strange noises from his mouth. And a couple seconds later, I heard some scuffling and I went out into the hallway, and I'm looking down the hallway and I'm seeing this man stab my father with a knife. And as I saw this, I screamed and went towards them to help. And by the time I got there, my dad had collapsed on his hands and knees, and the man turned around and was going to stab me in the front. So I turned and he stabbed me 3 times in the back, and I went down. He turned quickly around, and as my dad was on his hands and knees, he did this all over again, many, many, many times, and he collapsed. I tried to get up to help for the second time, and the man put his hand on my shoulder. I backed into the living room. We were staring into each other's eyes, and I see the knife by his head, and I see it come towards my face. I turned my head, and it embedded my head several times here, and I went down on the floor. And the thing that I can't even explain to this day is how I was able to, as a human instinct, I call it, hold my breath to pretend I was dead, because I could hear him above me watching and looking down on me to see if I was breathing, to make sure I wouldn't be a witness if he had to stab me more times to make sure 100% I was dead. I was lucky to convince him that I wasn't. So he just started going through the house, and my dad had crawled to the front door. And as I opened my eyes and I heard the man in my room in the back, I was watching my father trying to breathe on that floor. And I was like, what should I do? What should I do? And sometimes I would be talking to God. Sometimes I would be saying, is this really happening? Because it was almost like unreal to me. I mean, how prepared are any of us for these things? You know? So when I saw my dad take his last breath, there was a time where I had to ignore him and pretend that he was okay, to continue to make sure I was alive to save him. And the man finally left. I went to the phone. I called 911 twice, And the first one made me sound like a prank phone caller. So I had to call back again because I just needed to hear the words, help is on the way. Because my goal was, if help is on the way, then I could go running back to my father. And if my father was alive, I could hopefully hold him in my arms and he would be taking his last breath in my arms, not the cold terrazzo floor. Unfortunately, as many of us know, it doesn't always go our way. And after I heard that the dispatch told me that help is on the way, I'd lost so much blood that I had to sit down, and all I did was moan and hold the side of my head, not knowing what happened. I saw the policeman come in the house, and after that I was able to black out. And I just woke up 3 different times in the ambulance, in the helicopter, and in the emergency room. And all I did was ask the question, is my dad alive? Is my dad alive? Is my dad alive? And nobody would answer me. So instead of us going up to Indiana for Christmas to meet the rest of our family, my dad's first granddaughter, they were coming down to try to take care of us or to handle the situation. And I went into surgery. They had to take this whole side out of bone, shattered bone, and 2 pieces of my skull that were damaged by the knife. And I remember my mom coming into the NCIC room, and I heard her voice, and the first thing I said to her was Merry Christmas. But unfortunately for my family and doctors and nurses after that, all I did was ask if my dad was alive. And they kept saying, yes, yes, yes. They did that for a week. So that week also, since they had not caught anybody that did the damage, they had a police officer outside my room so that nobody could come in and kill me, just in case they would know, because it was all over the news. So a week to a day later, I found out later that this man that did it, James Bernard Campbell, was the one that did something to my father and me. And unfortunately, it was the worst day of my life, because my mom, instead of her saying Merry Christmas to me, she said, Suzanne, your father's not alive. Well, I didn't really handle it that well. I basically was trying to rip out all of these tubes that they had in me and all over. And all I wanted to do at that moment was die, because I did not save my dad's life. So it was really a bad feeling, and like I did nothing, and I didn't want to live anymore. But it was after that they had to put something in me, a shot of something in me to calm me down and take me to a solitary room after that. And it was after that I had to think of more than, is my father alive? I had to say to myself, what do I do now? Who am I? What am I supposed to do with this whole situation? And as the time went on, it started getting to me that I had to go through many years of trials, literally trials, to see where it was going to go for this man, James Bernard Campbell. Was he going to get life? Was he going to get death? What was going to happen? And what role did I play in this? And so I discovered, when some people were coming in to visit me, that they asked me questions, Suzanne, do you forgive him? And immediately, as a PK, preacher's kid, okay, said yes, yes. And 2 years after this happened, I was blessed enough to meet Bill Pelkey on Oprah Winfrey Show. And Bill Pelkey and all the people around him that knew him, which is Rick, of course, and many others, that I was blessed enough to be brought into, I call it my death penalty family. My death penalty family, because I could not have done without you all. And he was able to show and teach me how he was able to forgive Paula Cooper, that he murdered his grandmother. And we went around the world, and I said to everybody, yes, I forgave James. Yes, I forgive him. But why would I come home and I would still be very angry at this man? And I was confusing myself, but I started to realize is that I was not forgiving him 100%. So the trial started, and as it went on, I told the prosecutors immediately that I was against the death penalty. My family was against the death penalty. My father was against the death penalty. We didn't want it. And they made it sound like they were going to do in our honor what, we wanted is life, not death. But the first sentencing, he was given the death penalty. And I thought, what happened here? Something's not right. And so it went to a prosecutorial error to the Supreme Court in Florida and back, and we had another sentencing hearing. And I testified again, and I told the prosecutor again, we did not want the death penalty. But he was able to get the jurors to submit that they wanted the death penalty too, and the judge. I'm thinking to myself, okay, something has got to change here because this is not working, what I'm doing or not doing. So I had to, believe it or not, me as a victim survivor had to hire a lawyer, a victims' rights lawyer, to help me get my victims' rights out in that courthouse, in that courtroom, and to help save James Bernard Campbell's life. So I hired this lady that teach me what I could do in my next time I had to testify, the last sentencing for James Bernard Campbell. It was interesting because before I testified, the judge said, Suzanne, you're not allowed to say your opinion about the death penalty. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, am I in America? I'm confused. Something's wrong here. I thought it was in America. I thought I could tell my opinion, but they said, no, you couldn't. So they started for the last testifying of SueZann Bosler. And she taught me things that I could do for not to let the prosecutor have as much control of the jurors. So he asked me my name and my address, and then he asked me, Suzanne, what is your occupation? And this was the time where it changed that whole atmosphere of that courtroom. I looked at the jurors and I said, I'm a hairdresser and I work to abolish the death penalty. And I heard complete silence in that courtroom, and I didn't know what to do. And then the prosecutor pretended to the jurors, said he was okay. He asked me another couple questions, and then the sidebar started, and the whole atmosphere changed, as I said. So the judge turns to me and he says, Suzanne, after they put the jurors out, of course, he said, Suzanne, if you ever say your opinion about the death penalty again, I will put you in jail for 6 months. And I will fine you $500. And wow, that was one thing I wasn't expecting. So you can see it on 48 hours that was done on me, that it was pretty, I wasn't prepared for that. But you know what? It didn't stop me. I went through the whole rest of that trial with no emotion and told them like it was. And the jurors could see clearly. I knew that they knew I wasn't for the death penalty. Now, here's one more thing I need to share, because 8 years before it happened, what helped me the first 5 years, since I didn't officially forgive him, I did it for my father, because my father said, Suzanne, if anyone were ever to murder or kill me, I would still not want that person to get the death penalty. Let me tell you, I will never forget that. And in the trial, I didn't tell you this part, but in the trial, I was able to, one time when the jurors were out, I looked at James Bernard Campbell and I said, James, I forgive you, whether you accept it or not, I forgive you. And that wasn't just words that came from here. It came from the bottom of my soul. I really meant it that time. And it was funny how I had more strength and more power to get what I wanted done. And that was life, not death, for James Bernard Campbell. And boy, my strength, I just didn't know what to do with it. But I did what I had to do. On June 13th, 1997, I was able to get it turned around to four consecutive life sentences for James Bernard Campbell. So it was that moment where I had to really put the most important person that was in that room with no voice, and that was James. And I consider myself his voice to save him. And that was my goal. So Bill Pelkey, Rick, Marietta, George, and Sam, that are founders and co-founders of the Journey of Hope, and people outside that we're all together on this somehow, that we will always be together and we will always continue to be speaking our stories and knowledge for the education of all those people out there that need to understand how I became from anger forgiveness, healing, and still be against the death penalty. Okay, before I forgave James Bernard Campbell, I cried tears of anger and vengeance. After I forgave him 100%, I cried tears of just missing my father. And I'm allowed to do that. If before I 100% forgave him, I thought I was actually expecting him to say, "Sorry, Suzanne, I killed your father. Sorry, or thank you, Suzanne, for helping to save my life." After I forgave him, I didn't need that anymore. It was all for me, not for him. And so I want to remind people that, like this shirt that I'm wearing and Sabrina and other people are wearing, if you don't want to talk about the death penalty, these are ways to people to read it, or a bumper sticker on your car, or a button, or a t-shirt, a sign in your yard, or something, write to a senator or someone you need in your state that still has a death penalty. We all are working together on this. And I feel that here is James Bernard Campbell. This is the man who did it. But he's not just a number. He has a name too. He has a name. He had a mother and father that created him on this earth. And I truly believe that it is not our place to do that. To me, I say this a lot, is why kill people who kill people? To show Americans that killing people is wrong. It's very simple to me. And lastly, there's a lot for all of us to say, but I will say this, is I always hold this up for people too. Who would Jesus execute? And I know personally would be nobody. My father, Reverend Bill Bossler, my father that I loved very dearly and will always love. I will work with Rick and all these people, Sabrina and everybody, Gary and everybody on here, that to abolish the death penalty in America. I will not stop until the last one is done. I will not stop telling my story and educating people about that. My father's favorite hymn was, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. And I always say, it will begin with all of us. Thank you.
You're so strong, Suzanne.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you. Obviously, these
Suzanne, great.
first two stories are reflective of the powerful women who triumphed from the tragedy that was inflicted upon them through no fault of their own. Very powerful women. Gary, if we can turn to you, you have your own story, so please, and thank you.
Thank you, Rick. My name is Gary Drinkard. It is definitely a pleasure to be here today, and only by the grace of God am I here today. In 1993, I've been fighting workman's comp for about a year, where I had a back injury and a knee injury on a construction job. They didn't want to settle with me, so I had to lay up in the house, taking a bunch of pain pills, bunch of muscle relaxers, just to survive. I tried to do little odd and end jobs to bring in some money. Had 3 kids, wife, and had to support them some way. Finally, workman's comp settled with me. My oldest daughter, her biological father, about the same time, he had was on disability, and she started getting a check for that. So we got a settlement for her for about $17,000. Workman comp settled with me for about, it was right at $24,000. And in 1993, that was good money. My daughter was getting a check every month for $400, and we bought 14 acres of land. Was fixed to build, had a place cleared off. Was fixed to build a dream home and move away from where we were. I went to a local college and signed up for polysomnographic technology, which was sleep disorders at the time, because I had to have a different vocation from construction. I was still on the meds. I didn't go nowhere without my wife and kids. I mean, nowhere. Everywhere I went, some of my kids were with me or my wife was with me because my head was foggy. I couldn't really drive that well. And if I got to where I couldn't drive on medication, my wife would take over. Well, it was dry. It was August, hot. Lord, it was hot. And we didn't have air conditioner. We had used fans, had the doors open, just screens on the doors. And it was dry. My wife and myself smoked marijuana. And it was dry. Nobody had any available. And all of a sudden, my sister came up with a quarter an ounce. She brought it to me, and it wasn't that good. But we took it because that was all we could find. We had it hid in the shed. Kids never knew. 16-year-old daughter never knew. They'd often ask my wife and me, you know, why we'd come in laughing. We'd just tell them we was out there talking about them, and, you know, just play it off some kind of way. Probably 2 or 3 days after that, the door bust open early one morning. Police running the house. I mean, throwing my wife and myself on the floor, handcuffing us, dragging my kids out of the bedrooms. One of them put a gun to my son's face, leaving a bruise. He was only 9 years old. This starts infuriating me. I was scared to death to start with because I didn't know what was going on. And I started getting mad when they were treating my children like this. They pulled my oldest daughter and her friend out of the back bedroom, wouldn't let them get dressed. They brought them out in their bra and panties in front of all those police. And I'm cussing them at this point because I'm mad. I'm asking them what the hell they're there for. And they provided me with a search warrant for marijuana. And I'm thinking, how do they know I got marijuana? I hadn't been selling to nobody. I had passed. I had passed because that's part of the game. You got to sell it to do it. They went straight to the shed after they tore the house up. They went straight to the shed where I had it hid, and they got it. They arrested my wife, myself for possession of marijuana, and carried us to city jail. Now, normally, the DEA or somebody that's going to come out and bust you for drugs, they will be carrying you to the county jail because I lived in the county. But they carried me to the city jail, and they started asking me about a murder. I told them I didn't know nothing about a murder. In the next room over there, which I didn't know nothing about, they was interrogating my wife and browbeating her to death, telling her that I was going to kill her, telling her that they was going to take the kids away from her. They was trying to get her to say anything she could, and she didn't know nothing because I hadn't done nothing. And probably after 2 or 3 hours that we wasn't able to tell them nothing about a murder, they gave us the bond on the marijuana. When we go home, we scared to death still because, I mean, this was a big shakeup. I'm not really worried about the marijuana, and I ain't going to tell them my sister gave it to me. Lo and behold, the police give it to her to sell to me. But before I left, the lead investigator told me if he was me, he'd run for the hills. And I told him I ain't going nowhere. I'll be at home or I'll be in college. And I was going to be. At that time, I was 38 years old, and not bragging, but I was a tough SOB. I mean, I'd fight at the drop of the hat and win 99% of the time. I'd been in the military. I'd learned a lot of stuff, and I wouldn't take nothing from nobody. And I guess that's why they came after me. My sister, later I learned my sister got stopped in a traffic incident and got caught with some cocaine. Police told her they'd drop the charges if she'd tell them something. And for whatever reason, my lawyers think that she thought her and her boyfriend would go get caught for the murder. That's why she told them I did it. But she told them that I committed the murder, that I told her I committed the murder. And that's why they come after me. 2 weeks after they let me go for the marijuana, they come after me with a capital murder charge. They had arrested my sister's boyfriend and threatened him with life without parole if he didn't corroborate her story, and naturally he had to. So they gave them immunity to testify against me. When they arrested me for the capital murder, they come to me like gangbusters. I mean, SWAT team on one side, blocking off the bridges after I dropped my kids off to school. 2 police cars in behind, automatic weapons. I thought they was gonna kill me. I really did. And it's I mean, like I say, I've been through the military, and I have never been more frightened than I was that day. Sergeant jerked me out of the car. Like I say, it was August and it was hot. I had on a t-shirt and shorts, and it scraped my side when he jerked me out of the car. He intentionally did this and threw me to the ground, bloody in my knees. They took me straight to the city jail, took pictures of these scrapes because there was supposed to have been an incident where the man was killed. He was supposed to have got into some kind of altercation in the kitchen with whoever that robbed and killed him. So they were going to say this was from where he got in the altercation from it. I didn't know at the time, didn't know nothing, didn't realize nothing. I just knew I hadn't done nothing, and I was going, surely somebody could prove it. They put me in the county jail, and probably after about a month, they carried me to court and appoint me a couple of lawyers. In Alabama, we don't have public defense system, so they appointed me a couple of lawyers. They had never handled a capital murder case. They had done minor criminal law, and during the 2 years I was there, they came to see me probably once. They wouldn't accept phone calls. They did the basic motions. I mean, I could have did the same motions they did had I had access to a law library. But when they first talk to me, they tell me not to worry about it, that there's no evidence against me, just sit there and be calm. So that's what I intend to do. Another thing that I didn't realize till after everything was all over with, the police continued to let me go to my doctor to get the same medicine refilled every month, the same narcotics and the same muscle relaxers. So my head would stay foggy, and I really couldn't think and help my lawyers out if they were going to do anything. Finally, probably about 2 weeks before the trial, they come to me and asked me, did I know any witnesses that they could talk to? And I said, sure. There was a dog breeder where I bought the land. She had come over the night of the murder and helped us birth some puppies. She had gave my oldest daughter a Pekingese dog. It was registered. It was an expensive dog, and it was fixing to have puppies. And she wanted to pick up the litter. And when she came in and helped my daughter birth the puppies, me and her boyfriend were sitting in there in the living room watching the news, watching TV the whole time. It was during the time the man was murdered. And she went home, straight home, and wrote it down on her calendar when they were born. And that's the only way I knew where I was the night of the murder. And I told the lawyers, yeah, they were witnesses, my doctors, that they would testify that I wasn't really able, if that I had been in an altercation, because this junkyard man, he was supposed to be a big, strong man. And like I say, back then I was tough, but I had been reduced to nothing all that year, taking them pain pills and muscle relaxers, laying up on the couch. Went to trial, and the judge let it slip out to my mother if I put on mitigating evidence that he'd give me life without parole. I'm not getting my mother up there begging and crying for my life when I hadn't done nothing. Stupid Southern pride, whatever you want to call it, idiocy, but I ain't getting my mother up there begging and crying for my life. And I told them they kissed my ass. I wasn't going to do it. And they found me guilty and sentenced me to death row. Well, I wasn't an angel. I had been in trouble before. I had been to prison before. And I knew to watch my back. And I'm thinking, Lord have mercy, this is the worst of the worst. I got to watch my back all the time. I get down to Alabama's death row, and I'm here to tell you, you would not believe it. It's just like I'm sitting here talking to you guys. They told me that they weren't about all the fighting, all the homosexuality, all the stress, that they were trying to prove to the public that they were better than what they were accused of and what they were sent to die for. And there was never a fight on death row in Alabama. And we could get to each other. We went out in groups of 30 and 40 to exercise because they didn't have that many guards. We had full contact visits with our families. I mean, it was unique. It's a little different now, but it's still pretty much the same. But there was never a fight. There was several arguments, but there was never a fight. People were going crazy left and right because they couldn't get any decent medical attention. I was playing volleyball one day, broke my thumb. Went to the doctor. He x-rayed it. Yeah, it's broke. You're on death row, ain't you? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, go back there. It'll heal before they kill you. I said, Doc, you ain't even go give me an aspirin or something? He said, no, you can buy it off the commissary. That's the kind of medical attention you had. They provided the very minimum to sustain human life. And that's what they did. Two guys down there, they were taking some type of liver medication. One of them stopped. He lived. The other one that was taking the medication, he died real quick. People were committing suicide, trying to beat the executioner. It was unreal. They would save up the Elavil. The psychologists would come around and give you Elavil if you wanted to be calm. And they would save up the Elavil to commit suicide about 2 weeks before the death date. One man actually committed suicide. He was dead. The hall runner that was passing out the food trays one morning seen him, called the guards. They take him to the hospital, and they revived this man. He's brain dead, but they revived him where his heart's still beating, so he can go around there and sit in that electric chair. So they could set him in that electric chair and kill him again. Now, how crazy is that? How insane is that? One man hung himself with an extension cord. In the summer, in them cells, it was upwards of 120 degrees. The warden took the little box fans that we had inside the cell to keep the air circulated away. You when you was laying down, you'd sweat so much it would soak the bed. You'd have to get on the floor and put water from your sink on the floor just to get comfortable on that concrete floor. I had heard during this time, it was the time Professor Proteus in Illinois and journalism students had got somebody off death row. So I started writing everybody I could get an address for, begging for help, telling them I was innocent, telling them a little bit about the story and trying to pique their interest. Finally, I got a hold of a Mr. Richard Jaffe in Birmingham, excellent lawyer, super lawyer. He's deemed a super lawyer. And he told me at that time, if I could come up with his fee, $250,000 plus expenses, he'd take my case. Of course, I couldn't because the 14 acres of land I had, my wife had to sell to help her and the kids survive. I knew I had good issues on my appeal, and I really thought that I'd win my appeal. Well, Alabama has two steps. They have an Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals and then an Alabama Supreme Court. When it went to the first step, they denied it and sent it on to the Supreme Court. And my little hopes just got dashed, and I was all distraught, thinking of suicide and all this garbage. And finally got that out of my mind and got back on track. I was in Project Hope to abolish the death penalty at the time. And they were, they're like witness innocence now. They're a heckler support group. They're an anti-death penalty group in Holman Prison. But after probably about 5 years, I win my case in the Supreme Court, prosecutorial misconduct, and get it reversed and remanded. And I'm begging my appeals attorney from Brian Stevenson, Brian Stevenson's organization to get me an attorney, because I didn't know Mr. Jaffe had talked to someone and got himself appointed to my case. Well, Randy Suskin from Brian Stevenson's organization, he calls Chris Adams out of the Southern Center for Human Rights and gets him and a couple of investigators to take my case. So when I get back to court, I've got a dream team. That's what the newspaper reads. Drinkard's got a dream team. And I was so blessed. I thank the Lord every day. And I definitely believe in prayer because that's the only thing that got me out of there. I really thought they was going to kill me. I told my wife to find somebody else to help her with the kids, and she thought I didn't love her, but that wasn't the case. I thought they was going to kill me. Forgive me for a minute. This has reduced me to an emotional wreck. I mean, I still try to talk about it because I know we've got to. There are more innocent people on there. The death penalty ain't right. But I won my lawyers put on a terrific case in the second trial. They made the lead investigator out to be a liar. I mean, my sister had wore a wire to my house after she sold me the marijuana. She wore a wire to my house, and the lead investigator said he was sitting out in the van and heard me say, "The old man grabbed me and I went for my gun." That's what got me. That's what got me convicted on the first trial. It was a complete lie. There was an FBI expert that tried to enhance the tape where she had wore the wire. And my second lawyers, Mr. Jaffe and Mr. Adams, asked him, was that possible? Could the investigator have heard that? Because we couldn't hear it in the courtroom. He said, no, he's lying. So the district attorney had to clean him up, made him admit he made a mistake. He didn't say that. And I was found not guilty in the second trial and released. I laid up at my mother's house for about a year, trying to get my legs back in shape, trying to get my body back in shape because the muscles had atrophied so much. I went back to college, told the teachers what had happened, been on death row, asked them, could I get a job in respiratory therapy? They said, sure, if you do good in classes, do good in clinicals, you can get a job. I went for about a year and a half. Within 6 months of graduating, I applied to a hospital for a job. They laughed at me. Said, with the capital murder on your job, on your record, you'll never get a job in a hospital. And I was devastated again. I mean, what do? You can't get a job. Reduced to working in flower beds for a little old lady. But I loved it. I mean, I actually learned to love it. And I was making decent money. Believe it or not, I was making $20 an hour working in flower beds. I'd never believed it. But I really wanted that job in the hospital. 2005, witness incidents come to me. Sister Helen June had created the organization. They asked me if I want to be a member of it, told me what it was about, and ever since, I've been going all over the world speaking out against the death penalty. It ain't right. It ain't right. Love you, folks.
Thank you, Gary. Again, another heartbreaking story, as these all are, as I'm sure our audience members can clearly hear how impactful these nightmares were, and still are on these individuals. Thank you
I still
again,
have
Gary.
nightmares going to the death penalty.
Reverend Dr. Jack, if we can turn to you and listen to your story, please. And thank you, obviously, for spending time with us today.
It's a privilege to be in this forum today with all of our anti-death penalty colleagues and friends. And I want to say from the outset also that I stand on the shoulders of Bill Pelkey, who, along with Suzanne and George and Marietta and so many others, gave me the language that I needed in order to tell my story and to be heard. I am going to tell my story in a different way today. And I'm going to just read to you from testimony that I have given in the Ohio Senate concerning a bill that is before the Senate right now to abolish Ohio's death penalty. It contains an element of my story that I really want to be heard by prosecutors particularly, and the public in general. So, and by the way, I'm blessed to be the chair of the board for Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing. And it is a privilege to be in that role and to stand in solidarity with so many people who, like myself, are saying to prosecutors and juries, don't kill in our name. So, testimony. As always, I begin by acknowledging that the public has every right to be outraged over violent, horrific acts that distort or destroy the lives of fellow citizens, our neighbors, public servants, and more. To be very specific, family members of murder persons, often called co-victims, a label that I myself have been forced to wear after the 1997 murder of my baby sister Jennifer in Cleveland, we are justified in harboring feelings of rage and anger over the killing of our loved ones. Our sentiments, our reactions to the calculated, unethical, and immoral decision-making that drove other human beings to engage in grotesque, murderous acts that abruptly, or sometimes over a long term, ended the lives of other human beings, our family and community members, and thus forever altered the direction of our families and our communities. Now, at this point, as I reflect on my sister's murder, I must respectfully yet pointedly ask pro-death penalty prosecutors to refrain from using the worst of the worst argument to justify their reliance on capital punishment. I am demanding that they stop assigning murder style points and numerical values to try to persuade society to make sense of the nonsense of the death penalty. For I can tell you that when your loved one is murdered, your heart breaks, your world is shattered, and your family is irreparably broken with no possibility of closure, none. Each case feels like the worst of the worst. Accordingly, each case deserves to be given top priority status. Each case is worthy of the full engagement of investigators and district attorneys and prosecutors. My sister's killer has yet to be identified and brought to trial. I would like to think that the police did everything they could have done to bring my sister's murderer to justice. But to this day, we still do not have any answers. I cannot help but wonder, though, what the outcome might have been if that worst of the worst orientation to crimes were not in place, and if more resources were diverted to law enforcement agencies, particularly in the so-called inner city areas of our American lives, like Cleveland, where my sister was murdered, if more money had been allocated to those communities to prevent and investigate crime, rather than wasting money on immoral, inconsistent, and incoherent capital systems that do not work. This much is true. Not one family is made whole by the imposition of the death penalty. Not one family experiences restoration through executions. Executions teach no lessons, right no wrongs, reduce no crimes, and heal no families. Executions have no power to help families experience closure. They just continue the cycle of homicide that claimed our loved ones and demonstrate that the state can be just as brutal, calculating, and immoral and cold as the people it prosecutes. Rather than investing an estimated $17 million a year in the capital punishment industrial complex that accomplishes nothing good, why not redirect those funds to co-victims who could use the government assistance to create uniform, statewide victim family assistance programs not controlled by prosecutors that can assist in covering things like funeral expenses, mental health care, buying food, paying mortgages, meeting tuition costs, and other expenses that victim families face in their journey toward restoration. When my sister was murdered in 1997, I sought such help from the Ohio Victims Assistance Program. Within days of my request, I received a letter promising more information and more attention. Yet as I sit here on this panel today, 24 years after Jennifer's murder, I have not heard one additional word from the Victims Assistance Office. No correspondence and no funds have been directed toward my family. Meanwhile, funds that could have been directed toward restoration of families like mine continue to be invested in the judicial quicksand of revenge and retaliation. My friends, it is time for us to stop seeking and imposing the death penalty in Ohio, in other death penalty states, and in the federal government. It is not right for victim families. It is not right for people of faith and morality. The death penalty, wherever it still exists, cannot be mended. And therefore, my friends, it must be ended. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jack. Powerful words, and hopefully those in Ohio that you spoke to will hear them and act appropriately. We certainly hope and pray that that will be the result. Thank you so much for all of your efforts, and clearly sorry for your loss and everybody on this panel who went through this and lost a loved one. Melanie Herbert, if we can come to you. I said at the very beginning, you're last on the panel, but your story is certainly not least. Very compelling, and I certainly thank you for joining us and invite you to share your story with everyone. Thank you again.
Hello. My story is about a doting uncle of mine that I grew up loving and having a very close relationship with. My uncle was only 7 years older than I was, so he was more like a big brother to me than an uncle. And like I said, we had a close and very loving relationship. He was sort of the sweetheart of our family, having been adopted by my grandparents when their 3 natural children were grown. And he was welcomed into the family and just had a big group of people to adore him and spoil him. And then when the next generation came along, he turned around and did that for us. So I grew up really enjoying my relationship with him. But over the years, as I grew up, he became estranged from our family. And I was a relatively young child. I was maybe 10 or 11 when this happened. So I wasn't really privy to the details of the estrangement, but he kind of drifted out of our lives for a time. And then he ended up on death row, having committed a murder and being prosecuted for it. Then I was not able to have a relationship with him because I was still just a child, just a teenager living at home with my family. So again, I wasn't really told the details of what happened. As I became a young adult, I began to kind of seek out those details for myself. And as his execution date neared, I was contacted by my sister, who had been secretly visiting him on death row for a couple of years. And his execution date was approaching, and he had asked to see me and to be able to visit with me one last time before his execution. So as I mentioned, this was done in secret from our family because we had been told that he had changed. He was not the person that we had grown up with, and that he was not somebody worthy of love, and that pretty much our entire family had turned their back on him. But my sister had been visiting him, and since he asked to see me, I, after a bit of soul searching, I decided that if I could give any kind of comfort to a dying man who had been an important part of my life and had made me feel special, then that was something that I wanted to do for him. So I did go to death row and visit him on the day before his execution. So it was the first time I had seen him in more than a decade, and I was an adult by now. And it was an eye-opening experience for me because, of course, when I sat down and was able to talk with him, he was the same person that I remembered, and we had the same connection. And I realized that I still loved him, and I was able to forgive him for what he had done to our family and to society, because he was still a person that I knew and loved. So his execution was the next day, and he asked me to come back and spend the morning with him before his execution. And so I did that. Again, this was sort of behind the backs of all of my family, and just something that I had to do on my own for him, but I didn't have any family support. And through a series of convoluted events, our family found out that we were visiting him, and it became a big issue for them. Particularly our father and our grandmother were very upset with us for visiting with him and asked us not to go back, and really begged us not to do that to our family and to ourselves. They told us that we would regret it and that we wouldn't be able to undo the damage that it would do. But I decided that it was something that I needed to do for myself and for Spencer, my uncle. And so I did go back and visit with him, and again, had the same experience that I'd had the day before of witnessing a person that I knew and loved, who had done something terrible but remained the same person. After I visited with him, I went back to gather with my family. We were all gathering at my grandparents' house at the time of the execution. There's not really a protocol for a family like ours for what to do when somebody you love is being executed. And so our family just decided to gather together and wait out those hours. And while I was at my grandparents' house, shortly before his execution, just about an hour before his execution, Spencer called to my grandparents' house, and through a chaplain, he asked to speak to me, and he asked me to give a message to my family. And his message was that he sought their forgiveness for what he had done to them, and that he wanted them to know that he forgave them as well for the experience that he had had of being shut out by most of them. It had been a difficult experience for him as well, and he wanted to express his forgiveness before he wasn't able to do that anymore. So then his execution took place, and I can really relate to what you were saying, Suzanne. After his execution, I think I felt the same things that you did, like, what do I do now? What is my role in this situation, and how do I use this situation? So I have spoken about it over the years to lots of different groups, because I want people to see my face and to think about a group of people that probably are not thought about a lot when someone is executed. I think we think a lot about the family members of the victim who was murdered, but I don't think that society thinks a lot about the entire other new set of victims that is created every time someone is executed, because we also are family members of a murder, a victim of murder. The difference, I think, for us is that while it is always a difficult circumstance to be a family member of someone whose life is taken, the difference for us, I think, is that it's particularly difficult to have society cheering about it, both figuratively and literally. People are cheering when our loved one is murdered, and that's an indignity that is truly difficult to endure. There also is a lot of shame that comes with being the family member of someone who's executed, because our grief isn't really kosher. It's not something that we can talk about, that we can share with a lot of people. For example, another of the indignities that I experienced through this was that I was a young adult with a new job, and I needed some time off to visit with my uncle the day before his execution, and then the day of his execution. And then I also wanted to take off the day after his execution, knowing that it would probably be an emotional time for me. And so as I asked for that time off from my boss, I had to lie and say that I needed time off for the death of my uncle, which was true, but in fact, that death hadn't happened yet. So I had to imply that I was needing time off for bereavement for a death that had occurred, which hadn't occurred, but it wasn't something that I felt like I could share with someone that I didn't know very well. When I returned to my job after his execution, my boss had left the local paper open to the story about my uncle's execution. She recognized, I think probably put two and two together and recognized the name and figured out what I was doing. And she just wanted me to know, I think, that she knew. And so she left that for me to see, open to that article. It wasn't something I ever felt like we could talk about. I didn't know if that was a show of support or if that was a way of her letting me know that I had told her something that wasn't true. So, like I said, there's a great sense of shame that follows those of us who endure the execution of our loved ones. And we don't really know how to deal with it. There's not a good place in society for our grief. Another thing that I wanted to share in terms of the indignities that family members face is the day after the execution, my parents went to go and claim Spencer's body and have the funeral. And my mother told me that she had to wipe blood off of my uncle's face because it hadn't been done by anybody else. And I think that's another example of how not only was he cast aside, but then we were cast aside as grieving family members. I don't think that that's something that we would have experienced if we had lost a family member in any other way than to execution. I think what I really want you to take away from my story is what it does to the families of someone who is executed. It really, for our family, it really tore us apart. It was something that we were never able to overcome as a family. My dad and my grandmother carried a lot of anger toward me for many years, and they both have passed on now, and we were not able to ever reconcile that. I think partially because, certainly for my dad, I think he really endured a lot of shame for turning his back on his brother. And then I don't think he knew how to forge a relationship with me because I was able to forgive and he wasn't able to forgive. So then he sort of turned his anger on me. I became a scapegoat for him for his own shame. So like I said, we were never able to overcome that as a family. And now that my dad and grandmother have both passed, that is not an option for us anymore. So what I want you to understand is that the death penalty creates an entirely new set of victims. So for each execution, there's a family of someone who was loved and cherished and desired by their family. In the case of my uncle, who was adopted, someone who was precious to a family who was taken away from us in a most heinous way. And then instead of having support from society, we carry shame and guilt throughout the rest of our lives.
Thank you, Melanie. Very, very powerful, very sad indeed for all people in your family and beyond. It's these stories are they're just fraught with difficulty and raw negative emotional feelings because that's all the death penalty encompasses. Even when it results in a triumph of an innocent person, of course, being ultimately freed from those incarcerated surroundings, the negativity that brought them to that, the whole system is just so wrong. Let me ask our participants who are witnessing this if you have questions for any or all of our panelists to please put them into the chat so we can, so we, meaning the participants on the panel, can get to them. I just want to offer a reminder that Sabrina really has to leave in about 10 minutes or so. So if anyone has a specific question for Sabrina, I urge you to put it into the chat and we can get to it. And let me ask everybody maybe just to take a breath or so, and we'll see if any questions come for any of the panelists.
May I take this moment, Rick, to thank our coalition partners on behalf of the Dallas chapter of Amnesty International. I would like to thank our co-sponsors, especially Amnesty International USA and Amanda Armstrong for helping us facilitate this discussion. I would also like to thank the North Texas Peace Advocates, the Peace Mennonite Church based here in Dallas. I would like to also thank Pax Christi Dallas and the Reed Justice Coalition, and all who have been with us throughout this year as we produced these 4 webinars about the death penalty, its impact on society. As we are seeing today, it's devastating to hear the stories of triumph and the stories of tragedy, what this death penalty represents to society. So thank you to all our co-sponsors, and thank you to all our panelists for joining us today.
Thank you, Hadi, who is one of the leading human rights and anti-death penalty activists here in Dallas that I'm blessed to work with on a steady basis for decades now. I'll ask a question if I may, and Sabrina, I will start with you and ask anybody else to follow if they so choose in the time you have left with us, Sabrina. As we all move forward and as your stories move more to the background, every year, of course, it's something more in the past to you in that sense. As you see it now, older than when you were when it occurred, what do you assess where we're at with this issue in general and its impact on you in particular here as we end another year in 2021? How do you assess all of this on your own life as of today?
Well, for one, I have learned a lot when it comes to death penalty, because before this happened to me, I was not knowing very much about the law and anything in that aspect. But now I have learned that this is more horrible than I thought it could ever be, because they're using the death penalty as a weapon. That's what they're doing. And they're using it as a weapon to people of color and people that are poor and people who can't afford legal attorneys and things like that. And that is horrible. I just don't think that, like I said earlier when I was talking to you, no one person should have the power, that much power, to decide who lives and who dies. That just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, it is horrible for you to say, okay, I'm gonna kill Joe Blow over here because Joe Blow did it, How are you any better when you're doing the same thing? It doesn't make sense to me. And I just really think that instead of us imposing the death penalty on people, I think we should come up with a better way. I have the girl that was on death row with me is still in prison, and she calls me all the time about how horrible how horrible it is. You're not rehabilitating these people. You're making monsters out of people that actually committed crime. Why don't you take the time to rehabilitate people? Use the money that you spend on the death penalty for something else. It's like roads, bridges, all this stuff that we need. We're using money and we're throwing it away because of vengeance. And that's crazy. That doesn't make sense. So I just don't think the system is correct. And I really do think that the death penalty needs to be ghosted. I really do, because it's not right. It's not right at all by any aspect.
Thank you. Gary, there's a question for you from Bob Sheeks, who asks, Mr. Drinkard, does the misbehavior of law enforcement and prosecution in your case seem to be an instance of a systemic problem?
It definitely is, because they're doing it just to gain notoriety, to get themselves advanced in their positions. Like the lead investigator, he was promoted to sergeant after my conviction. The prosecutor, the assistant prosecutor, he ran to be the head prosecutor. He failed, but he thought he was going to win because he was tough on crime. They don't care about the truth. They just want to get a conviction so they can better themselves in their jobs. And to me, that is horrendous. If the prosecutor hadn't got greedy in my case, when my sister was testifying to what they were going out and robbing and burglarizing houses from the stolen stuff that they were caught with, if the prosecutor had to ask her, wasn't Gary the ringleader, wasn't he the one that was setting up all this, I would have been killed in Alabama. If he hadn't got greedy and asked that lie, because I wasn't. I mean, I knew my sister and her boyfriend was hooked on cocaine real bad. I knew some of the things they were doing, but I didn't know they were killing people. And if he hadn't got greedy, Alabama would have killed me.
And just for the sake of context, Gary, what years were you on death row in Alabama before you were mercifully released?
I was arrested in 93. I was sent to death row in 95, and I was released in 2001.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Jack, if I can come back to you and the legislation that is pending in Ohio, could you give our audience maybe an assessment of what you think it might do? Do you think it is likely to pass? And if it were to become law in Ohio, what would it mean?
Well, as of now, public opinion in Ohio is showing that about 60% of Ohioans favor abandoning Ohio's death penalty in favor of other remedies like life in prison without parole, that kind of sentencing. And so we have momentum in terms of the public. Now, legislation in Ohio is gaining bipartisan, or is enjoying, I should say, bipartisan support, which is very, very important in Ohio, as you would believe. And so there's reason for us advocates to believe that we can continue telling stories, testifying at the State House, and countering opposition testimony that comes from prosecutors to the point where we might be able to see a shift here in Ohio. I'm not sure what a timeline looks like. It's probably not something that I would ever be able to forecast, but there are those who are more closely involved, I think, who may be able to predict. But I will tell you that we do have momentum, I believe, working with us, and more people are speaking up and speaking out against the death penalty in Ohio. Two bills are about the same, though, one in the Ohio Senate and one in the Ohio House. Both are calling for the end of the death penalty in Ohio.
Do you, and chronologically, what do you anticipate will be the time frame when each of those chambers takes up the bill? Is that, do you think will happen in the spring, or when do you think this could happen?
I'll give you my estimate, and that would be the spring. I'd be a hope, I would say, from my vantage point. But there again, there are others who are working more closely, tracking these bills, who would be more qualified to offer an opinion about that timeline.
Thank you. Sabrina, there's another question for you from Diane Baker, who is asking, what's the most effective way that you can think of that we can change what can we do to change this system?
First of all, we need to first see who we're putting in office. We need to understand that the people, if they're the right people that you're putting in office, we need to go to our legislative sessions. We need to be there all the time to figure out what's going on and hold these people accountable. Nobody is being held accountable for the things that they do. The district attorney in my case was not held accountable when he knew that he was holding medical information concerning my son. He knew that. Nobody did anything. And I'm just saying, I think that we should go after this immunity thing. I do not think judges, district attorneys, none of them should have absolute immunity. We should take that away, because if you give a person absolute immunity and they take advantage of that, then what's going to be done to them? That's not fair. I think that charges should be brought up on these people who knowingly and willfully hold this type of information just to incarcerate people. We should fight that. We should go after that. That's the first thing we should do. And then secondly, we should start at the bottom. Whereas our police officers, they need more training. Not saying all police officers are bad. Not all district attorneys are bad. Not all judges. I'm just saying that we need extra training in these areas, because the police officers are the one who take the information to the district attorney. When we train them better and make sure that they are sufficient enough to go out here in these streets and do what they're supposed to do, I think a lot of things will change. You don't just be trigger happy and shoot people and do all this kind of stuff and putting people on death row without some type of, something needs to be done in those areas. That's what I think.
Thank you. Here's a
May I
question.
piggyback on that, Rick?
Sure,
May
please.
I agree with Sabrina 100%. We've got to get to the legislatures and the representatives. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
My age is getting to it.
Let me know when it comes back, not if.
All right.
So there are two questions here. The first is from Christy Hagersheimer. Is there an organization similar to Victims' Families Against the Death Penalty for the family members of persons on death row, or family members of victims of executions? Or are they included within the existing Victims' Families group? So maybe Suzanne or Melanie, maybe Suzanne, could we start with you? Anything you want to address with that question, please?
Well, actually, that's why I was going to bring up too with Melanie. Thank you so much, Melanie, for sharing that with me. I would love to talk to you after some time, but it's so true, is that Journey of Hope is the co-founder and co-founders are all of victims ourselves, but we have welcomed all victims, which are people that have had someone executed, and families are all welcome into our group for sure. And a lot of groups that I know, as Sabrina and everybody is a part of, I know most of them that I know of are definitely included and welcomed into joining us. We're all doing this together, and we all are victim survivors. So yes, we are definitely in cohorts with that.
Oh yeah, and I want to say that we are witness to innocence, and we're death row survivors. So we're death row survivors and family members and victims' family members. So we do have that in our organization. Whereas a lot of people come in, talk about, we work with victims' family members. So yes, we do that as well.
So Melanie, you have the email addresses of everybody here, and clearly you might want to reach out to them. Any comment that you want to make, and then I'll have a comment here from Roger Stock. But Melanie, go ahead if there's something you want to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's really moving that to know that we would be accepted into a group of other victims of family members of victims of murder, because like I said, there is that stigma and shame. And so it's very difficult for people on my side of this side of the victims to reach out, because I think we sort of feel like we're not the same. We shouldn't be included in that group. So like I said, it means a lot to be welcomed into that community, because we are all innocent victims of the system.
Absolutely. So here's a comment from Roger Stock, and he writes, in California, we still have the death penalty, but the governor has stopped all executions. But they continue to sentence and imprison people on death row. After listening to the speakers today, I realize that nothing has really changed except the act of execution.
Absolutely.
And clearly, that is
It's true.
quite an accurate assessment. As you all know, we are done with executions for this year. Mercifully, the country will finish with 11 this year. There are numerous executions scheduled already, starting next month in January. A report from the Death Penalty Information Center that was released just yesterday indicated that the national death row population is now under 2,500, a 25-year low, but still one person is too many, and almost 2,500 is 2,500 too many, for sure. And this all of the struggle goes on. Sabrina, go ahead.
I just wanted to say before I get off that my what's disheartening to me is that if a person wants to prove their innocence, why not let them? If it's any way possible, somebody can say, hey, I didn't do this. Give me the opportunity to prove my innocence. It should be done. I just don't think that this is the right way to do things. And it saddens me to know that we have a society like that is willing to vengefully kill our people. And what do you get out of that? I mean, what is, oh God, it's so disheartening. I just don't know how to express myself no more than I have. And I'm sad that we are in a society like this. And I also want to say before I go, Miss Susan, if you can, could you reach out to me? Because I wanted to ask you a question, whenever you get a chance. But I have to go, guys. And I really thank you guys for having me. And good to see you again, Gary. And God bless
Sabrina.
you guys. God bless you.
Thank
May I
you so
share
much,
something,
Sabrina.
Rick?
Thank you.
May I share something?
Yes.
Please.
Got a Christmas card 2 days ago. Project Hope to abolish the death penalty in the Holman prison. All the guys on Project Hope sent me a Christmas card. Only Christmas card I got this year. I love the guys still on death row.
Oh, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you for joining us, Sabrina. It's always an honor to share time with you.
Thank you. See you later, Rick.
Okay. Here's a question from Lewis, and I guess this is for anybody here that may choose to answer it. I guess this is really for you, Gary. It says, thank you all for sharing. A personal question. What was the most dehumanizing of being on death row? Dehumanizing part of being on death row. I read a lot about the lack of physical human contact being the biggest factor. But is solitary confinement or other specific treatment worse than the lack of human contact?
Well, to me in Alabama, like I say, Alabama is unique from all the other death rows that I've heard about. We were allowed to, in our little 5x8 cells, we were allowed to buy a 13-inch TV. We were allowed to have a box fan, to circulate the air. We got to go out in groups of 20 and 30 and 40 to exercise. But the most dehumanizing thing there, when they set you in the death cell right before your execution and right before they come to kill you, they don't put a depends on you. They bend you over and handcuff your hands to your ankles and pack your rectum with cotton, and then come out and laugh about it the next day, how the people were squirming and shit. It makes you want to jump on the guards and hurt them. I mean, I had a good friend that a lady had proven his innocence, but they killed him anyway, Brian Baldwin. And they were laughing about packing his rectum with cotton, and it infuriated me so much that a couple of my friends had to stop me from jumping on one of the guards. I mean, to me, that is the most dehumanizing thing they can do. Other than the non-medical that they have there, I can understand that they can't spend that much, that we're going to die. You know, the people that are going to die, and they're not going to waste their medical money on them or anything like that. I can understand that. But to not buy the pins right before you kill them, that to me, that is the most dehumanizing thing in the world. And it just infuriates me how people can be that sick. I went to a legislatures down in Alabama one time where we was trying to get compensation. A joke that is. Some of the senators asked the assistant attorney general what the difference was of innocence and not guilty. The attorney general said, innocence is when they didn't do nothing. Not guilty is when they didn't have enough evidence to prove they were guilty. And there's no such thing as innocence in a trial. I mean, you can't bring it up. There's no verdict like that. And he just lied to the senators, and of course they swept the compensation under the rug. Alabama's not going to give anybody anything. But yeah.
Yeah, terrible. Melanie, you raised this issue before. It's always, as I mentioned to you, I've heard you tell your story many times, and it's always like a punch in the gut to hear it, to hear all of these stories, but to hear how it tore into your family. Now, as you said, two of your family members, your grandmom and your dad, have passed on. As that story, as the execution of those days again fades, doesn't fade, but you become more removed from it, and as your own children reach young adult stage, could you share any potential impact on your own children who go through this, listening to their mom talk about having gone through it? What impact have you seen, if any, on your own children?
It's interesting that my children, having grown up hearing this story, my children have seemed to be confused that this is even an issue, that this is something that a developed and civilized country is taking part in. As I think I've mentioned before, I've always taught my students and then my own children that when there's the inevitable bickering among children, I've always taught them the mantra that two wrongs don't make a right, and you don't repay a wrong with a wrong. And so my own children have asked me, why is this happening? Why are adults doing this when we all know that two wrongs don't make a right? And that's not true in childhood. I mean, it doesn't work in childhood, and it doesn't work in adulthood with issues like this. So to say that something is wrong and to punish it by doing that same wrong thing just doesn't compute to them.
Thank you.
Rick, is there
Go
any
ahead.
way I could add to that a little bit?
Please.
I remember it was about 15 years ago, I was brought into, I think it was South Dakota, and they let me speak to fifth graders, which are about 10 years old. And it kind of freaked me out a little bit because I haven't talked to a 5th grade or children. I thought, you know, people were saying you can't talk to a below an age and things like that. But they brought me into this 5th grade, and I told my story with less, you know, details. They were all listening very nicely. And then they said that this elementary had a school newspaper. They took me to the library afterwards, and I got to be interviewed by the people on the staff. And all these questions that they asked me were so interesting by 10-year-olds. That there's this one girl that sat right next to me right here. And I said, you know, one last question. And she looked down and she goes, well, I just wanted you to know that before you came and talked to us, I was for the death penalty. And it gave me such hope that we can talk to literally 10-year-olds and on up. Start them young, and look where these intelligent children can go to and help other people understand what they learned and they are learning as they get older. We can talk to 10-year-old and up. I mean, just like I said, not details and everything, but we can do it. We can talk to anybody. Journey of Hope and Witness and everybody, Amnesty talks to schools, colleges, universities, ministers, churches, legions, public places, legislators. We are welcome, and we will welcome any invite that any of us have to get the word out.
I have
Just
been
wanna-
blessed.
Go ahead, Gary.
I have been blessed to go to many schools and colleges and talk to the students. And it's so refreshing when they come up to you and say, "You've changed my mind, Mr. Drinkard. You know, I'm no longer for the death penalty." I mean, it is so refreshing, so heartfelt when the kids come up and tell you that. And I've been blessed to be able to go talk to several of them.
I'll tell a very quick story. Suzanne has heard me say this before because it involves her. When she and others came and spoke to my classes here at Southern Methodist University, and Suzanne told her story. My classes are always in the evening, and at the end of the class, this young co-ed sitting in the back of the room came up to Suzanne. She was crying, and they hugged, and she said, the student said, I'm from Miami. I remember when this case happened, and I wanted the death penalty for the person that killed your father and attacked you. And I'm paraphrasing the student, but now to listen, to meet you and to hear you talk about forgiveness, and this was the student asking the rhetorical question as she was crying. She said, "What does this say about me? What does this say about me if you can forgive, and I'm not even related to anybody in this crime, and I wanted the death penalty?" It was one of those moments as an educator in your classroom, in my class, that was just profound in witnessing transformation of a human being by listening to a story and coming to grips with it for herself, what the power of testimony can do. I mention this a lot, and I'm honored again, Suzanne, that I can say it again in front of you as to how powerful all of your stories are, all of them. And I hope that when the pandemic allows travel, that we can bring all of you to Dallas or back to Dallas so you can talk to more of my students, and hopefully we can do it by Zoom before then again. But I just want you to know that when travel becomes safe to do so, you're all going to hear from me again. So you're not off the hook just because this Zoom call is going to end in a little while, just FYI. We are coming down the end of this. Again, I just want to make sure you see the question from Amanda, or maybe you haven't seen it. If you know of the case in Alabama of Rocky Myers,
I do.
who clearly innocence issues in his case as well.
Rocky and I were good friends.
And we can send you a link there if you can't see it, just so you're FYI about Amnesty's awareness and involvement in that case. Let me ask each of you as we come down the stretch: is there anything that you want to say or ask? There is Bob Sheeks is asking me a question about the entry of Elizabeth Frizzell into the race here in Dallas County. She's going to challenge our current district attorney, John Crusoe, who is for the death penalty. Elizabeth Frizzell ran against him once and lost by less than 600 votes. And I can only say that any county in the country, including Dallas, should have a DA committed to never seeking the death penalty in any circumstance, regardless of how heinous the crime or emotional the crime allegedly was. Society has to get beyond this, and Elizabeth Frizzell, if she can offer an alternative to stop seeking death here in Dallas, of course, I and many others would be supportive of that effort. So, Dr. Jack, can I start with you? Anything you want to say here as we get ready to wind this down? And I'll just go in order as you appear, as all of you appear on my screen. So please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. And I must leave after I issue these closing comments. But as a Christian minister and theologian, I think our discussion should spark a widespread debate within the church. How is it that so many of us who sing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, on a weekly basis can deny grace and can deny mercy to those who have angered us and hurt us the most, or at least are accused of having done that, because we know sometimes we're not guilty. But it seems so challenging and obscene to me that the Church of Jesus Christ is not speaking with one voice loudly and clearly that we oppose execution, that is not consistent with our faith, the gospel of Christ Jesus. It is not consistent with the love and justice that is part of the faith of Christ. And so I'm looking forward to having more debates and more discussions with people in the church, because I believe fundamentally, if we as people of Christ would say enough of the death penalty, tomorrow it would end. And so I want to have that debate. So I look forward to more storytelling. I'm glad I could share mine with you all today. God bless all of us, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan. I'm so honored that you could join us and spend time with us today. Thank you, and God bless. Melanie, I guess I'm coming to you as next on the screen as I see it, and then Gary, and then Suzanne. So Melanie, any last thoughts or comments that you want to raise?
Yeah, I would like to say that one of the most moving comments that I've received after speaking to a group, actually at one of your classes, Dr. Halperin, was a girl who wrote me a note. She was too emotional to talk to me, but she wrote me a note that said, you know, I have always considered myself to be a proponent of the death penalty, but after listening to your story, now I'm not really sure. I haven't changed my mind, but I just want you to know that I'm thinking about what you said, and I've honestly never thought about people like you before. So I would say that my goal in sharing my story is not necessarily to move people to change their minds fully. It's a big leap to go from being against or for the death penalty to being against it. But I feel like if I can just open people's minds and hearts to a group of victims that perhaps they haven't thought about before, or if I can move people from seeing things in black and white to seeing shades of gray, I feel like that's progress. So that's what motivates me to keep going. And I hope that all of you will keep that in mind too, that in sharing our stories, we might be moving people just a little bit, and every little nudge, I think, helps.
Thank you so much. I hope your children realize, I'm sure they do, I hope they realize just how fortunate they are to have you as their mom.
Thank you so much.
They are beyond fortunate.
Thank you.
Gary, any thoughts or comments from you?
First of all, Rick, thank you so much for having me. Melanie, Suzanne, Dr. Jack, thank you guys for sharing your story. It brought deep emotions to me, especially yours, Melanie, because after I was arrested, my wife and kids was ostracized, people actually came to my house and killed our animals, killed the dogs, killed the goats. When my wife finally was able to get a job and they found out that she was married to me, they fired her. My kids was they were bullied in school, and it just, the death penalty is just not right. I mean, what we do to other individuals in this lifetime, it just never ceases to amaze me how we can be so evil toward other people for not even knowing. I mean, you don't know what somebody else did till you walk a mile in their shoes. That is a true fact. You don't know them until you walk a mile in their shoes. And for people to just do that, I can't understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Suzanne, any last thoughts or comments from yourself?
Oh my gosh, Rick, it is sometimes so hard to talk after these amazing stories. I almost forget my own. So everybody, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being able to, help us and give us this story to think about and understand and to research and go from there. There's so much I could talk about, but I'm going to say again about, I'm so glad everybody was on, but it was great to hopefully meet someone like Melanie, that I will say another time and time again, is that you are very welcome with the Journey of Hope. And I hope to talk to you soon, because I feel whatever side you're on, we're all in the same boat. I lost a father, you lost an uncle. We lost somebody, we just have different stories. But we are all survivors, and that includes you and Gary and everybody else. But I also wanted to bring up about things that bother me the most. And that's one thing about the United States, I will say, that shocked the heck out of me when I discovered there was more at the time when it happened with my dad. It was electric chair in Florida, and it was known as Old Sparky, that had done some botched things, as everybody knows, Jesse Tafaro and Sonny Jacobs. That's another story right there. But how barbaric can United States be? In some states, that some people know, there's still 5 things on some of the laws in some states. There's electrocution, gas, hanging, shooting, and lethal injection. Still on some laws, not that they're all already used, but we know Randy Gardner, that his brother was killed by firing squad. So that really blows my mind when there's some world countries that don't even have the death penalty. Third world countries that have the death penalty. And now another thing that brought up by Sabrina and other people is that the United States is spending millions of dollars on people that don't even have any money. That is ironic to me. Spending millions of dollars to kill someone that had no money to begin with. Listen, in Texas, Rick, you remember Lois Robeson? I was there, Bill was there, a bunch of other people were there watching her in front of that yellow and black long plastic thing that we weren't allowed to cross, as we watched the people go up into the death to watch witnesses to the death penalty of her son. And she's standing in front of it, and it could kill me every time. She was holding his picture in her hands, and she was crying like a mother that was losing her son and wasn't allowed to be in there. And it really, I go back to that, Rick, so many times, and I just cry like heck, because everybody on death row has a mother and father. Some have brothers and sisters, some have children. Again, I will say, they were put in, they have a number, but they have a name. They bleed the same blood that I do. They're human beings. And I will continue, not just Florida, but United States, to not kill in my name. Do not kill in my name. And I will do this until I take my last breath. And I will honor Bill Pelkey and everybody else to have compassion for humanity. But I will again say that our last one, Virginia, we had time to celebrate, but we have to move on to the next one. And we're going to continue until they are all done. So God bless you all and thank you all, but we are all going to continue doing what we have. I will say one more thing that Jack reminded me of is that no offense to people who are against the death penalty, but we need to reach out to the people, like Melanie said, that are not sure, or they are against are they for the death penalty? We need to go out to them to get it going, and fifth grade and up.
Yeah.
So God
Yes.
bless you all. I love you all very, very much, and blessings of all the sharing. Thanks.
Well, I'll follow up on what you just said very quickly, because that's really the segue, because all human rights issues individually are educational issues, because people have to learn about them, challenge themselves, whether they believe in these issues or see the seriousness of it, to help work to end the violations. And the death penalty is easily a human rights issue, and it's a human rights education issue. And you are exactly right, Suzanne, and all of you that have spoken with schools and other groups. You, at those moments when you tell your stories, you become the educator. Frequently, you can see people's hearts and minds change because they'll tell you how impactful they were, but you also never know how impactful your words were when people leave a classroom or leave an audience and go home and begin to think about it and don't get to tell you at that moment that you've changed their hearts and minds. So I can only urge us all to see this for the issue that it is, a central human rights issue of our time in our country, one that we really have to do eternal vigilance on. There's no end to this issue until it's all ended throughout the United States, at the state level, the federal level, the military level. We all live to see a death penalty-free America, and ideally a death penalty-free world. But that is our goal when our last breaths come, that we can at least take our last breath in a country that no longer kills people or tries to kill people in the name of the law. I want to thank all of you again for making this possible, for spending some of your time with us, your powerful stories. Thank you so much. God bless all of you. Amanda, any last words from you? You've been the host, you and Hottie. No, you're shaking your head. So, all right, let me thank all the participants for spending time listening to these stories. Get involved. If you have questions, reach out to anybody in your state or to Amnesty or Witness to Innocence, Journey of Hope, any of these organizations. Get involved if you're not already. This is your struggle. You just don't know how it could happen to you the way it happened to any of these people who had it thrust upon them through no fault of their own. Thank you all. God bless.
If I could help any way with Rocky Myers, call me.
Yeah, I guarantee you're going to get a call. So thank you all. Have a good rest of the weekend and a safe holiday season.